It's funny that Professor Agcaoili and I had something in common. He went to the University of the Philippines, Santo Tomas, for his Bachelor of Classics. He almost became a priest. I also almost became a priest. I got kicked out of the seminary because we stole the priest papaya. And he discovered girls, of course. My grandfather finished in the same university as Professor Agcaoili. He became a priest, but he had 10 children. Okay? So he ran a parish in Leyte, and he was protected by his classmates from the University of Santo Tomas. He remained a priest, and had, my father and 9 of his siblings. And then Professor Agcaoili also went to UP, where I also went and graduated. So I guess I'll pass it on to Julius to introduce Professor Agcaoili, who, by the way, got his tenure this year. So there are more Filipinos and Ilocanos now in the UH faculty, and I hope you kids would, not only explore the language but also the culture and history of this very fascinating society that I'm in. I come from the Philippine South, so my Ilocano is 0. Okay. The only Ilocano you used to make fun of was the Marcos, President Marcos. We used to make fun of the Marcos dictatorship and we were curious. Our always favorite line was always to say, "Who got the lollipop of my son, Bong Bong?" That's how Marcos did it. We couldn't do it because we used to get arrested. So what we used to do is to get drunk and imitate Marcos, and the police would say, back. It was a way of undermining the regime in our time. But anyway, so thank you again for coming. I'm going to introduce you to Professor Julius Bautista. We're going to introduce our main speaker to this really wonderful, interesting, controversial talk. The logic of mother language, the rationalities of national language, the cultural democracy in national. By the way, I failed Filipino in grade school. So I have the third thing that I'm common with Professor Agcaoili. All right. Thank you, Julius.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor to introduce a colleague and also a mentor who has really mentored me a lot over this past 7 years with my dissertation in education. So thank you so much. And he had asked me to introduce him today, and really it's an honor. Dr. Aurelio Agcaoili is currently the coordinator of the Ilocano Language and Literature program here at UH Manoa with the Department of Indo-Pacific Languages and Literature. He is one of the advocates of NACM Conferences, an international association dedicated to the promotion of cultural pluralism and diversity, and to increase the diffusion of knowledge on the people of the Ilocos and, of course, the Amianan, which is the north. He is an award-winning creative writer who writes in Ilocano, English, and Tagalog, and he also served in many capacities in the community as board of director for the TMI Global, the Timpuyo de Manoa na Ilocano. He served as the vice president for the Oahu Filipino Community Council and also Gumil, Hawaii. And he also received the 2009 Pedro Bocanek Award, which is the highest recognition award given to a creative writer by the Gumil Filipinas. So without further ado, because I know he's going to be covering a lot of things today, I would like to give your aloha to Manong Aurelio Dr. Solver Agcaoili.
I'm sorry. This is my first room of them. I thought the late.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jojo and Dr. Julius. Let me start off by saying that I was also asked to go out of the church of Miss Clem Montero because I was more in the streets than in the convent praying. That was the reason why. It was the height of martial law, and it was the height of the Bomba films. So we were doing both Bomba films and martial law after the rally. So that's the reason why I could not make it to the priesthood. But it's where I learned my knowledge of some classics, and I was forced to learn Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, Greek, of course, Espanol, and I was even punished to interpret the Vulgate in Latin and the Gospel of St. Matthew for a week by my professor because I was writing a poem rather than listening to his dogmatic teaching. So that's my background. So you would see that I am not gonna be saying nice things in this talk. I have to warn you, if you don't wanna hear things that you have not heard before, please get out, okay? It has been a passion to look into these problems concerning the Philippines and the peoples of the Philippines. I'm using the word peoples in the plural. And I don't buy the crap, the English crap, that people is only singular. I have refused to accept that as far as the Philippines is concerned. Now, the idea is that we have been nations, so many of our people, before we ever thought of a fictive, imaginary, sometimes unrealistic idea of the Philippine nation. And so I thought that there has been the Ilocano nation before there ever was a Philippine nation. And there has been the Bicol, the Samar, the Cebuano nation before there ever was a Philippine nation. You've got to understand that the idea of Philippine nation is a social construction. In fact, it's a political imagination, born out of the propaganda movement, eventually rising to what you would call another understanding towards the 1896 revolution. All right, so this is the idea, and this is the reason where I am coming from in this argument. I'm arguing, therefore, that we cannot hold on to the idea of the Philippine national language as the principle by which we can eventually evolve a just and fair and democratic understanding of what a Philippine nation is supposed to be. We cannot, in conscience, social and otherwise, proceed with the idea that the Filipino as a national language can become eventually the principle for what we would call a just and fair society for all Filipinos. That cannot be supported by facts, historical and otherwise. That's my argument. Okay, now, and that's the reason why I am summoning here the power of the mother language and its magic, its ability to redeem us, which I call the logic of the mother language. And therefore, I am saying, looking at the binary of what is rational and what is irrational, to anchor upon here another concept which I call democracy in action. I'm going to explain those big things in my definition very briefly so that we will not pick a fight with each other. If you do, I will end it. Okay. Now, let's go to the next slide. Let me start by starting from my rage. I'm still raging until now. And I hope that this rage is actually here in conjunction with the kind of rage as defined by Rollo May in his understanding of what is creative. Rollo May was summoning, for example, among the ancients, the idea of the demiurgus. The demiurgus is a god or a principle that is at the same time destructive, but at the same time, once this destruction is over, there is a creative power that comes and that ensues. That's the idea of the demiurgus. I was so enraged because each time that I look into what you would call our literary accounts, documents of the evolution of the national language, everyone is somehow not saying all the things that we should know. I have not encountered, not from scholars, from Gonzalez and others, who have really looked into the real accounts of the proceedings of the 1934-1935 Constitutional Convention. No one ever did. The farthest that Gonzalez did with his book, Language and Nationalism, is to look into Arruegos, annotation of the accounts of that convention. Now, that's why something like 4 or 5 years ago, I really made it a point to really spend 2 months in the Philippines, go around libraries and archives, and look for the proceedings of the 1934-1935 convention. I found one that is complete, all the rest were incomplete. And God bless you should go and see before this is going to be destroyed. It's at the library of the Josepe Laurel. It's housed in a 2-story house in Ermita, and it's wooden. And it's being administered by an old man, as old as I am. I'm 78. So all the other documents of the proceedings that I went to, like the Supreme Court, that should have the complete proceedings, they do not have. But I found the proceedings, the volume on the discussions of the national language. And when I read through these accounts in both Spanish and English, there was the rage. I said, why is it that these proceedings were published only in the 1960s. In fact, 1966 in fact. More than 33 years after the end of the convention. What were they hiding? I was asking that question. Were they hiding something? And why we said that in the deliberation of the convention and the provision of this language, the national language, why was it that in the fourth draft, why was it done in a viva voce way? Why? And who manned the Style Commission? Who were those involved in the Style Commission? And so if you're going to read into this accounts of the proceedings, you understand why I would say we have been deceived for 75 years already. In fact, it's 77. Now, let also me start by saying that on December 30, President Aquino congratulated everyone except me for having reached the 75th year of the Philippine national language. Because on December 30 of 1937, Quezon signed Commonwealth Act 184 coming from an Executive Order 134, saying that, among others, the Tagalog language is going to be the basics of the national language. That was CA 184 coming from EO 134. So the deception begins. My question is that, do we have to keep on with our life as a people in this collective imagination of forming a nation and a state that is actually respectful for everyone, based on a deception? In those deliberations, they were trying to understand what principles they were supposed to be following. Number one, the principle is supposed to be the most number of people speaking the language. When they could not get the number, because Tagalog was only 90% of the total population at that time, and the Cebuano language, for one of every four Filipino, there were Visayans. That was what it was. So, if you were the president with all the powers in the world, what would you do? Well, do something. You are not president for nothing. Your guess is as good as mine. Now, I'm trying to lead you to this, how I am going to argue for this case. In 2009, I must confess one thing. I was part of the group that really did something to do something about the language situation of the Philippines. And luckily, Jesse Lapus, who was Secretary of Education at that time, signed a department order, 74, series of that year. And the order was saying that from now on, we are going to make the basic education in the Philippines different. We are going to get out of the bilingual education. And what we are going to do is go back to MTB. This is the mother tongue-based mother language education. That is supposed to be the official beginning of what you would call now the MTB MLE, which is now about 4 years old, 3.5, 4 years old. Now, what is this animal all about? This animal, in principle, is saying that we are now going to change the philosophy of basic education in the Philippines and say that we are going to begin from what students know in order for them to get into and explore what they do not know. Now, in linguistic terms and in educational terms, you begin from what is known and move towards what is unknown. And in linguistic terms, you begin from L1 and move to an L2, L3, L4, whatever L you have in mind. That's always the beginning, the L1. Now, what is this L1? This is called the mother language. It is the mother language because that is where the child gets to begin to see the world. Through the lens of that kind of a language, that is called the mother language. It is not a mother language because the language from the mother, that's wrong. In fact, the term, the phrase mother language is coming from an older medieval term, which in fact is a term rooted in the Catholic Church. When they talk about the mother church of Dr. Jojo Abinales, okay? The idea was, of course, it was used, Latin was used to somehow evangelize people. And then at that time, the idea that Latin was sacred, it's holy, it's coming from God, the God of Dr. Jojo, all right? So that was the idea of the mother in that mother language. So, and it moved to English, so it's not really the language of the mother. It is the language the child knows best when he begins to see the world, what he is known for, how he identifies himself. Sorry for that gender reference. I'm sorry, I should use she. Okay. And also that kind of a mark in which people get to know that person. Oh, Jojo is Visayan because he speaks Visayan. So it's also the other way around. So how we get to know, for example, another person is through that. That's called the mother language here. Now, we have started about this rant about the NL, the national language. I am pursuing here an argument. It's a conspiracy. And I believe that this conspiracy is actually a conspiracy that we need to unmask and unearth. And I'm going to tell you how to unmask this conspiracy in the end. All right. Now also in the third square, this idea of an NL is at best fascistic and at the same time schizophrenic in terms of what culture ensues from this idea of an NL. And I'm going to prove that also in the end. It's fascistic, and then what you get is schizophrenic. Okay, you're Filipino, so you dance the tinikling. There you go, fascism and schizophrenia. Alright? Alright. Oh, you're Ilocano, you like Kiloan, and all those other things. Okay, this schizophrenia of culture. Culture becomes therefore eventually here the 4Ds. Diet, dress, dialect. What else you have in there? Dance. The 4Ds. We cannot go beyond that. Because that's how schizophrenic this understanding of Philippine culture is all about. It's 4Ds. Alright. Oh, there you go. Next slide, please, Dr. Fred. My assistant is a doctor. Thank you, Manu Fred. Okay. This is my main argument. A national language in a polynational country like the Philippines is not only illogical and irrational, but undemocratic. I will prove that. All right, next slide, please. I talked about this. We had nations in the Philippines prior to the Philippines, and there's no need to elaborate on that. Now, when you have, what's the consequence of that? When you have nations before you have what you would call a political nation, what have you got? The only way out is to suppress these people, silence them, muffle them, and do the route of the fascio, which actually is the root of fascism. Fascio is an Italian coming from the Latin, which means to bind. It's bounded. How do you do that? Muffle people. You were not nations Ilocanos, Visayans, you were not. The only nation is the Philippine nation. There you go. Here we are. Alright, so we were not able to distinguish what kind of nation you're talking about. Now we move to the next problem. The problem really is the equation that we have been foisting and in fact using. The equation which we call in philosophy of language this isomorphic fallacy. When we say that when we have the national language, we create nationalism, and therefore since it's isomorphic, we say vice versa. We can reverse it. And we have not been able to get out of that. You don't speak the national language, you are not nationalists. Excuse me? Have you read the book of Brazil Mujeres talking about the brains of the nation, and one of them, in fact two of them, really are Ilocano Saglipoy and Isabelo de los Reyes? What are you telling? Before there ever was a Katipunan in 1896, there were 300 revolts and uprisings, and there was never any from the Tagalog areas. Where are these people gathering that kind of strength to revolt against the oppressors? Where? In these 333 years of Spanish occupation, tell me now, where? The Katipunan is a beneficiary of the 333 years of uprising coming from the margins. There's no other way to explain that. All right. Now, next slide. I'm talking about this nation as a political project. We cannot hold on to the idea that the question of the nation is attributed to the Katipunan and the Malolos Convention alone. That's not possible. The historical facts would tell you otherwise. It cannot be. All right, so we move along and we say this. We cannot. This project, as part of the imagination, has become what you would call the imagination of everyone. Filipinos, Tagalogs, Ilocanos, Visayans, or otherwise. We read the historical accounts, except Saide, of course. Saide is the #1 person who really misinterpreted everything, and I will tell you why eventually, okay? I'll tell you why. And then we say, prior to this Katipunan, I was talking about these revolts, 300 of them. That's on the average, if you are going to calculate the 333 years of Spanish occupation, it's about one uprising resistance every year of Spanish occupation, and coming from the margins. Explain to me what that is. Next slide. Okay, I was talking about this. We cannot absolutize the contribution of the Katipunan and the Malolos Convention. We cannot. There's no way. I agree that many of those who were members of the Katipunan really were Tagalog, but there were also Kapampangans, and in my research of the participation of the Ilocanos, I have seen uncatalogued documents written in Ilocano at the National Library, written in Ilocano and the blood of Ilocanos, of the Katipunaro documents. So what are we saying now? Are we here Shanghaiing everyone and then hijacking everyone and say that this is our contribution and no one was better than us? Now let's call spade a spade. How do you deny the Katipunan document talking about the membership of the Ilocano in his own blood and signed in his own blood? Deny me that, and I don't know what we are going to deny next. Now, I am here bringing in a new concept, the concept of speciality, as related to the very idea of what history is all about. We know, we understand in our critical theory that when you talk about history, there are at least two kinds by which you can approach the whole problem of the textuality of history. One is the historical way, and the other one is the historicistic way. The historicistic talks about textuality as already a fossilized textuality. We don't buy that rap. It's what Dr. Jodo does when he reads his Bible, because the Bible has said everything and you cannot add anything to that. Textual religious faith documents. Okay, I buy the other one, which is the historical one. Okay, what does it mean in terms of the speciality here in terms of the historical account? I argue that time is dialectical, but space is dialectical as well. That the space is not unchangeable, but is changeable. But space is not fixed. It's the same as time. It really can go on and move and explore. Now, what does it mean? It simply means that we have moved out, Ilocanos have moved out of the Ilocos and gone to other places. And that's why there are Ilocanos in the Visayas and Mindanao. So Ilocos is not confined anymore in the Ilocos. Forget it. So you've got to reappropriate those concepts. They don't make sense anymore. So we cannot fossilize anymore these two trajectories of what is historical, time and the space element. And in so doing, we understand, for example, how important it is to really understand the problem that has been becoming really a problem for us for the last 77 years. The hegemonic position of Manila. You know, I'm telling you one thing. So many scholars are not talking about what's happening to the proceedings of the Constitution because they did not read the proceedings. Quezon had in mind of one thing. He was envisioning the model for the state from at least two models. Spain, that oppressed Catalonia, Andalusia, and Basque. France, that also oppressed other languages apart from France. Germany, you know how it is. There is not only one German language in Germany. There are others. And then, of course, the other one is Italy. You know that Italy, for the Italian language to come about, beginning from a vernacular, there were other languages. So these models, for example, of Quezon really were models of oppression. He did not tell, but he was only interested in what and how to evolve a state. So you come up with a state, at whose expense? People around, people in the margins, people in the periphery, because they are not part of the center. In what sense, for example, historically, was this the French language chosen as the language of France? Because it was the dialect of Paris. And Paris is, in its speciality, was what you would call the seat of power. Simple. Tell me of any other logic. Alright? The Italians would say, come on. Bellissimo. No, 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 no. Alright, okay. We need to the next one, Manoa, yeah, please. Thank you. Now, here's my problem. Given all these problems that I really am bringing into the open, and accepting the reality that I think we cannot deny the reality that we are a fully national country. It's a country made up of so many nations. It's a nation, yeah, but then it's also made up of other nations. It's the same thing as we say in the US, right? It's a nation among nations, right? Okay, so what do we have? If we valorize only one language and legitimize and put a premium to that one language alone, and then at the same time here pushing the other languages in the margins, what have you get? What will you get? I do not know. People in power are talking about, oh, when can we ever be united? I do not know. But maybe your definition and your process for unification is not the real one. You have tested it for the last 77 years and we are still not united. Something's wrong. Right, okay. Now, also, I'd like us to understand now from this that the imposition of Tagalog as the basis of the national language is a kind of an abracadabra. It's a hocus pocus, it's a magic, it's a sleight of hand. Okay, now I am not using this idea of sleight of hand, but I am in fact borrowing it from one scholar, the name is Tinio, who is a dramatist also, and also from Leopoldo Yabes, one of the former scholars of Ilocano culture apart from Dr. Santiago. Okay, so these are their own phrases, okay? It's abracadabra, okay? It's hocus pocus. Okay, and I call this the Quezonian Salamanca. Make magic out of that. Now, can we move to the next slide? Now, the Salamanca began in 1937, but it, at least as far as the convention and the signing of the Commonwealth Act. But prior to that, it really began in the 1934-1935 Constitutional Convention. So you can trace back 3 years before that, of 2 years too, before 1937. All right. Now, what happened in this Salamanca? You have the formula, which in fact is a formula, in fact repeated by another one Salamancero, who is from the Ilocos, by the way, Marcos, the number one Salamancero from Ilocos. Isang bansa, isang diwa. One language, one state, one nation, one thought, one language, one set of words. Now you have to understand that this idea, isang bansa, isang diwa, which in fact is the slogan of the New Society of Marcos, is in fact a plagiarized concept coming from at least 4 countries that I mentioned: France, Germany, Spain, England, also Italy. Marcos was saying something new, forget it. Some people from the UP Diliman, the University of Georgia, wrote those things for him. Right? Okay? So there you go. Now from this model, we have been pigeonholed into believing that we can create this Philippine nation state only on these premises. That we cannot go beyond saying that and imagining that there can be isang bansa, maraming diwa. In English, one state, one nation, one country, many languages. We cannot imagine that because we are imprisoned by that idea that France is so good because it has only one language, right? Germany is so good, only one language. England, oh come on, the Italianos, come on. go beyond the borders. You might see some new things beyond the borders. We cannot. So this is the same condition we are in right now when we talk to people who really are so in love, so infatuated with this very notion of the national language. They talk to you as if you are coming from hell and say, hey, this one resurrected the old argument of 1934, 35, and 1937. No, I'm not resurrecting. I'm coming back to home too. Excuse me? Because I have as much right to claim the same things that you are claiming in the same country we call as the homeland. Excuse me? You understand? That's the logic in there. No, this is not rant. And if it were a rant, you deserve this because you did first what was undemocratic. Remember, I'm trying to link with what is democracy, cultural democracy in action. The clue there is participation, the full process of participation. Where is that? Okay, let's go to the next slide. We cannot imagine isang bansa maraming diwa. We cannot. Right? Is that possible? I say yes. Canada has done it. Belgium has done it. Switzerland has done it. India, how many official languages there are in India? There is not only one. Excuse me? If you don't know it yet. Bangladesh has to separate from some other people because they did not respect the language of Bangla. The Bangla. Pakistan, what was one of the main issues? Language issue. If in the end, 20 years from now, the Ilocano nation will separate from the Philippine nation, so be it. We are giving more remittance in the Philippines from Hawaii, from here, to the Ilocos anyway. We are propping up the economy of the Philippines. There you go. There will be a separate Ilocano nation, and we will get the visa coming, so we'll be paying more. I mean, we'll be earning more from this visa, so we go to Pagudpo, the Boracay of Ilocos Norte. Come, okay, we'll see. Okay, now I'd like us to look into this idea of nationalism. It's a problem. What is the problem really is this idea of what I call narrow Tagalog nationalism. It's a very narrow one. And then the sources of this, some of those people who do not know what they're talking about are quoting, in fact, they're misquoting Rizal. This morning, I checked again Simon, chapter 7 of the Alphabet Historians, they're misquoting him. There is this exchange between Simon and Basilio. Chapter 7, page 62. Okay, check it out. What happened? Rizal was very, very serious. It's what you would call having your own language separate from the Spanish language. But did he say that it was the Tagalog language? No, because he is not even fluent in Tagalog. He tried to write Makamisa, but then he finished, no, because he cannot anymore. Rizal did not have the idea of what freedom was all about until 1885. He didn't know freedom in Tagalog. He got it from another guy who translated his poem, and it was Kalayahan, now modernized as Kalayan. Tell me. There is another one that they misuse, and I want to slap everyone who say that. About a poem by Rizal, presumably written when he was 8, and this continues, this kind of an illusion continues until today. That's a lie. That can be presumed as Rizal's poem. Two scholars have really debunked this already, and one is Ambeto Campo, and the other one is the poet Almario, Virgilio Almario. They look into the style, they look into historical circumstances, and they said, no, it cannot have been written by Rizal. That could have been written by at least two other people who presumably knew Rizal and passed off as Rizal's to really make him really the pillar of everything nationalist and everything else. No, sir, we cannot. Now, we cannot therefore repush the argument by going back to Rizal. Rizal, we must understand, has a different mentality in those times. Remember the kind of a discourse they had with Bonifacio? Come on, don't misinterpret, because this is called bad historical hermeneutics. Forget it. Okay, it cannot. Now, what I try to bring to the open is this idea of nationalism as a commitment to form a body politic. Okay, let us agree to form this body politic. We call this as Philippine state, and we all agree that from this Philippine state, we are going to have our share of what is the summum bonum. Of course, that's Latin. I don't know what that means, okay, but let me translate properly. It's the common good. The common good, of course, is the very idea of what we can draw out together when we live together, which normally is translated by what we will call the virtues and the principles of a decent constitution. A constitution that does not deceive, that does not lie, that is not based on a deception. Alright? That's why when there is a deception or some kind of an inadvertent lie in the constitution or whatever, we have amendments, right? Or sometimes they totally reject and come up with a new one. But the very idea is that the articulation of the summum bonum is the constitution, presumably, or the set of laws afterwards after this constitution. But the idea is that that one holds a kind of a principle, that highest good in English, summum bonum. Now what do we have? Fairness, equality. What is supposed to be good for everyone? Alright? In the US, do we have summum bonum? No. We go to a hospital, you have to give your copay, even if you have insurance. Forget it. Alright, now we have problems with the summum bonum in the US too. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Now, we look into this idea of the mother tongue. I had established this in the beginning, and there are at least 5 popular definitions which I already said a while ago. I'm not going to repeat this, but I would say that if this were your lens, the first lens you ever used in articulating and seeing and perceiving and understanding, comprehending the world, why do you need to get out of that? Would you need the mother tongue to be able to somehow bridge your way to seeing and encountering other worlds, other experiences, other people, other communities? You don't discard it, do you? Now, from the framework of education and cultural development, you begin on what is familiar to you, what you can use in fullness, what you know. Now, the problem is we don't do that line of logic. We are doing the reverse. What we did, in fact, as a consequence is that we are teaching every Filipino the very logic of a second language, which is in fact the national language, and the logic of a tertiary language is in fact English. And every Filipino person is expected to speak Tagalog and speak English. The way they do, for example, English, they speak in Boston. Right. Now, let me see. What do I understand by rationality? I'm taking it from its popular form and its incorporated what you would call acceptable reason. Of course, I am drawing this from what you would call the critical school of thought, the critical theory, and I'm buying from there what I mean by rationality. Of course, we have the opposite, which is of course the irrationality, which actually is the negation of what you have here in the positive, rationality. Now we go to the next one, Mano. Now, you know this pretty well, but I just want to invite you to this so that in the end when we get to speak with each other, at least we are on the same page. Now, I'm trying to somehow simplify these definitions, but if you want a more complicated one, I'll give you the footnotes, okay? All right, okay. By hegemony, I mean this: the power and control of one group over another. By domination, I mean it's connected to the hegemonic, but I am referring, highlighting the ascendancy of one group, one language, one culture over another. And that, I think, is visible to you, is really comprehensible to you. That ascendancy that you are assigning at the expense of what I call the others. All right. What do I mean by industry? Of course, I'm still borrowing from the critical theory of philosophers, and I'm trying to simplify it this way. And I'm taking not the primary, secondary, tertiary definition, but I'm taking at least the last two, the quaternary and the quinary definitions. I mean here the idea of how knowledge is produced. And how knowledge becomes, in fact here, a source of what you would call now reproduction of the same knowledge for people. And at the same time, I'm referring to what you would call now research and technology, which is linked, in fact, with your quaternary definition in the beginning. So I'm not concerned here in the industry of how we extract, for example, resources from the earth, how we manufacture, how we provide services to our tourists in Hawaii. These are the primary, secondary, and tertiary definitions I'm using on the desk in these quaternary and binary definitions, okay? Yep. The production of knowledge and how knowledge is reproduced. Next. Manon, thank you. Now, I talked about this, the deception, and it's one way by which you can really get hold of your history. And we go to the next one. Mano, next slide. Okay. I talked about this, where he was borrowing this, and if you want to check what I'm talking about, check into that volume on the proceedings, which scholars do not mention at all. Second that, and Casson was talking about this. Right. Now, I'm talking about the motives of Casson. In at least 3 accounts, I counted from the Parale document, Parale book. You know, Quezon went to Letran and gave a banquet speech in 1937. Okay, and talked about this idea of Tagalog nationalism. This idea of nationalism, the national language. He went to Ilocos Sur. Of course, he was using an interpreter. And so he felt humiliated that when he was talking, because he's talking Tagalog, somebody is in fact translating his Tagalog to an Ilocano in Ilocos Sur. Of course, to an Ilocos Sur. What do you expect? He went to the Visayas. The same thing. So he was reporting that he felt so humiliated as the president of the Philippines that he had to be using an interpreter to be talking to his own people. So this stresses the his people, his possessive. Come on, if you are the president, at least we should have a language skills test. If you want to talk to us, not us talking to you, right? You are supposed to be serving us, right? We are your boss, right? Pinoy, Aquino, right? Yeah. You speak 5 languages in the Philippines? Hey, you should really come up with that kind of a qualification now. You are president of the Philippines, 5 languages, the minimum, right? Not us, according to your whims and caprices as the president of the Republic, even if you hold that kind of a position. You see, we have what you would call the ideological motive, which we are kept hidden. And we know that these are not the best examples of how we are going to put together what you would call a national language and the idea of a nationalism that is productive to our people, and it is productive because it is, in fact, here giving you fairness, freedom, and democracy. Right. Now, this is what he said. I'm quoting him. And all over. Check it out. Now, that's not the only one. You can check also from the accounts of Panlasegi. You can check from the accounts of Yaves. You can check from the account of Gonzales to corroborate what I'm talking about. And you will see that this personal incompetence of a president became one of the reasons why we need to have a national language. Come on, Italians. Right? You should come here and then take up all these courses at UH, right? We have 18 at our department, 18 languages. Right, okay, next slide please. Now, what happened? Deception and deception and deception. It was very clear. The 1937 documents coming from the 1935 convention, what was? One, the evolution of a national language based on one of the existing languages of the Philippines. That was the phrasing. And the INL, there was an institute put up, and by 1937 there was already the institute, all right? That was supposed to here implement this, what you would call the formation of the national language. You know what they taught in the schools? Tagalog. The document is saying that you are going to be here evolving a language and you're teaching in these schools Tagalog. Tell me, what's the connection? I thought it's really one of the, at the basis, one of them. And you're teaching Tagalog. It went on and on and on until 1959, when the people couldn't take it any longer in 1959. And so in 1959, they came up with a review. What was happening? And they de-ethnicized. And before that, what happened is that there is this industrial people evolved, and we can call them as the Mananagalog. Mananagalog is a person, which is actually is in fact a metaphor, is a person who is really competent in the Tagalog language. You are not necessarily Tagalog to become a Mananagalog. But here, you should really here become competent in the language. Now it in fact evolved what you would call now this people who really believe in those things as what we call now as Tagalistas. Alright, we continue on. Now by 1959, we cannot take in any longer with that kind of a deception, and so they de-ethnicized the term. And what they did, they used Filipino with a P. Shakespeare is wrong. He said rose is a rose is a rose, whatever you call it. Shakespeare, sometimes you are wrong. You cannot make a lie the truth. Call it with a different name. If the circumstances of the events remain to be the same and uncriticized and not responded to, and because they become reasons for people to be here, marginalized and peripheralized, it's the same deception. Called Tagalog, Filipino, doesn't matter. 1959. Now, what happens? By 1973, we had a constitution. In that constitution of 1973, what happened? They came up with a phrase. They talked about Filipino as being evolved, as being developed. That was the phrasing in the 1973. By the time that we hit 1987 with the Constitution of 1987, Eureka, we already have a national language. The name is Filipino with an F. So this is the evolution now of the national language. So 87, it's clear. We have a national language. The name is Filipino. And it's clearly stated in there. Now, all of these things really have bearing on what you would call now the education of the Filipino people in terms, in particular, to the idea of civics. Now, I'm interested in civics because this actually is where the area of citizenship and the sense of nationalism can come into the picture. How do we teach people, the young people, to become citizens of their own country, and the citizenship is grounded on the idea of fairness, democracy, and social justice? How? That's the problem. Of course, we have so many scholars coming from America, and at that time, they went to America, took some education from some of them are from, I don't know, Julius maybe, and then there was this in thing about mainstreaming Hispanics, and then the bilingual education really in America that's really important is you use the first language of the immigrants. Normally these are Hispanics, and then so you can mainstream them to the English language. You start from where they come from, and then you make them what you would call civic-minded citizens of the US that at the same time can speak their mother language and can also speak the American language, the English language. That's bilingual education in its truest sense. In the Philippines, we imported that, we imposed upon the people that did not understand what was happening, and we have bilingual education, meaning two languages, both foreign. Tagalog. Okay, let's call it Filipino. Or Filipino. No, let's call it now Filipino. F, okay. And English. Bilingual education, Diyos mio, deception again. That's not bilingual education, because the intent, the heart, and the core of bilingual education is you start from what the educand knows and move to what he does not know. That is the bridge. That's the tool. You equip with what he can be familiar with. And that is your mother tongue. Do not argue with me that the Ilocano child, the mother tongue is Bisaya. I don't know how can I justify that. I presume that the Ilocano child, the mother tongue is Ilocano. I'm presuming. Or maybe some others. It's possible that a person can have several mother tongues. Right? I don't know. Alright, okay, let's go. So we have problems. We keep on with these continuing problems. And if I need to stop, then let me know, Dr. Jojo. Okay? Yeah, I have 5 minutes, okay? And then I underscore this as the fallacy of education in the Philippines, which continues until today. The fallacy of education. What happens? What's happening? Our people are deprived of knowing who they are. You ask every Ilocano if he knows any decent Ilocano writer from his hometown. He cannot say, but he can say Lope K. Santos and Florante at Laura. He can talk about Ibong Adarna. Ask a Boholano if they know probably about Tamlot or Daguhoy. Probably they don't know how these people resisted the occupation of the Boholano people. Civics, education, cut my neck. Right? How do you now educate the people? By first depriving them of what they should know. I'm not an expert in education, but probably Dr. Julius will be able to answer this. How? I don't know. Okay, let's go. Now, let me summon now that our argument is protected by international covenants. I'm only going to mention only two. There is a provision from the UNICEF and then the UNESCO. And then all these provisions now, what happened? I'm not just there, okay.
I did that once the mouse.
Okay. What happened? Okay. And this UNESCO and UNICEF provisions are talking about what you would call language and cultural rights that are basic to people. That you cannot deprive of people of the basic rights to their own language and their own culture. Meaning to say, the international covenants really are protecting this fundamental right of people, and we must summon this. Why so? Because we signed, when I say we, the Philippines signed these covenants. And if you sign these covenants, you are beholden to follow these covenants. Oh, daghang salamat. You mean to say, Dr. Julius, just get out already. Yeah.
It's the machine at me.
Yeah, I click on this, so that's blinking.
Oh, it's...
Yeah.
Oh.
There you
Who
go.
is that?
Cancel? You mean I'm going out?
The illegal one.
Illegal? Oh, what happened?
Now it's fine.
Coming back to conclusion.
Okay, I can stop with daghang salamat. Okay, that's okay. Okay, what's that?
Alternative.
Actually, that
I think your file was corrupted.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So you corrupted my file?
No, Tagalog.
The Tagalog.
The ghost of Quezon.
Yeah.
Muddy.
Yeah, I can talk from my notes if you cannot take it back. Yeah,
Your file is corrupted. Something else.
I'm going to tell you about, okay, deception number 7. There is a film in 2007, released in 2007. The title is Agcaoili Saklolo. Translated in English, joke, maybe help me. And I'm so pissed, and I was one of those who really protested with this film. Gloria, who's that Gloria now? Miss Universe, Gloria.
yes.
Gloria Diaz was the grandma playing the two grandmothers, one of the grandmothers really, Gloria Diaz. And she was accosting the daughter-in-law, Judy Ann Santos, I don't know, one of those ladies, beautiful ladies. And then this is what she said in that film, Agcaoili Saklolo. And you need to protest this. Bakit pinalaki ninyong Bisaya ang apo ko? Why did you raise my grandchild like a Visayan person? This is pop culture. This is social media. This is film. Hear that? how will you react? I reacted strongly with this, and other Visayan people reacted strongly. We protested. I don't know what happened, but at one point I was told that Joey Javier Reyes was the director, was apologizes. You don't do that. You talk about the spoils of nationalism and you say that, bakit mo pinalaki yung anak ko na Bisaya? What are you saying? Italiano, woo. No, no way. Now, I just spoke with a graduating